My family sat me down at Thanksgiving dinner to inform me, not ask, inform, that my share of my grandmother's inheritance would be going directly into my brother's failing food truck business. What they didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I had already transferred every dollar of it into a down payment on a condo in Austin, 4 states away, and I had a start date at a new job waiting for me on the other side of the holiday weekend. But I need to back up, because if I start there, you won't understand the decades of groundwork that made that moment feel less like a betrayal and more like the last domino finally falling. I drove to my parents' house that Thursday with the windows down, even though it was 42 degrees out. I needed the cold. It kept me sharp. I had been fighting a sinus infection for 2 weeks, the kind that sits behind your eyes and makes fluorescent light feel like a punishment. And the last thing I wanted was to spend 4 hours at a table being studied and critiqued while my brother held court like he always did. But my mom had called 3 times that week. She kept saying it was important. Family meeting, but during Thanksgiving so we can all be together. I knew that phrasing was intentional. She always wrapped the hard stuff in something warm so you couldn't refuse without looking like the difficult one. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a second. The minivan was there. My brother's truck was there, the one he'd bought on a 5-year loan he definitely couldn't afford, and definitely hadn't mentioned to anyone until the payment was already late. I gripped the steering wheel and told myself what I always told myself. 2 hours. Keep your head down, get out clean. I work in healthcare administration. I'm 31. I manage contracts and compliance for a mid-sized hospital group, which means I spend my days reading the fine print that us other people skip, and I have a very particular sensitivity to language that tries to sound reasonable while asking for something that isn't. I've been doing that job for 6 years. I'm good at it, I am precise, and I am careful, and I have built a life on those 2 qualities alone, which, in my family, has somehow been interpreted not as discipline but as availability. The house smelled like it always did on Thanksgiving. Butter and rosemary, and that particular brand of tension that my mother masks with scented candles and a playlist of acoustic covers. My dad was in the living room watching football. He raised his hand at me without looking up. My brother was at the kitchen island eating chips and scrolling his phone. He glanced at me and said, "You're late." I wasn't late. I was 7 minutes early. I set my bag down and went to help my mom. She was pulling something out of the oven, cheeks flushed, and when she turned and saw me, she smiled in that specific way she smiles when she's already nervous about something. Tight, upper teeth only. "I'm so glad you're here," she said. "I need to talk to you before we sit down." "About what?" She looked over her shoulder at my brother. "At dinner. We'll talk at dinner. It's better all together." I knew then. I didn't know the specifics, but I felt the shape of it the way you feel a weather change in your joints. Something was coming, and my mother had already decided I was going to say yes to it. And the dinner table was being used as a stage because she knew I was less likely to make a scene in front of everyone. We sat down. Turkey, stuffing, green beans my mom had been making the same way since 1997. My dad said grace. My brother served himself first without asking anyone else if they were ready. Somewhere between the cranberry sauce being passed and the first compliment about the food, my mother set her fork down and folded her hands, and I felt my stomach drop. "So," she started, "we've been wanting to talk about Nana's estate." My grandmother had passed 8 months earlier. She left behind a house that had already been sold, some personal belongings we'd divided quietly, and a small amount of cash that she'd split between her 3 grandchildren, me, my brother, and our cousin who lives in Oregon. My share came out to just under $40,000, which I had already put to work. "Okay," I said. "Your brother's business is going through a rough patch," my dad said, not looking up from his plate. He said it the way he might say the weather's been strange lately. Casual, like it wasn't a setup. My brother's food truck had been going through a rough patch for approximately all 14 months of its existence. He'd launched it with a loan he'd taken out against his truck and a credit card he'd maxed within 4 months. He specialized in what he described as elevated street tacos, which was a phrase that meant He charged $16 for something you could get for $4 somewhere else, and the margins never worked, and anyone who'd ever looked at the numbers could see they never would, but pointing that out had always been classified as me being unsupportive. I know things have been hard, I said carefully. He needs an infusion, my mom said. The word infusion landed like she'd been practicing it. Clinical, palatable. Not a lot. Just enough to get through the slow season and rebrand, I repeated. New name, new logo, maybe a second truck eventually. My brother finally looked up from his food. He had the particular expression he always wore when he wanted something from me, somewhere between expectant and vaguely put upon, like my potential refusal was already an inconvenience. The concept is solid. I just need the capital to execute it properly. That sounds expensive, I said. We thought, my mom said, leaning forward slightly, that since Nana's estate is being distributed, it would be a good time for the family to pool together. A gift. From you to him. Just this once. Just this once. I had heard that phrase approximately 40 times in my life, always in reference to my brother, never in reference to me. How much? I asked. My dad finally looked up. 30,000. The table went quiet for a second. I heard the football game from the other room. I heard my own pulse. $30,000, I said, making sure I had it right. Of my inheritance, that Nana left specifically to me. It's family money, my mom said, using the phrase like she was handing me a blanket. Nana would have wanted the family to support each other. I looked at my brother. He was cutting his turkey with the focused energy of someone who had already mentally spent the money and was just waiting for the paperwork to clear. He wasn't nervous, he wasn't grateful, he was waiting. Can I ask a question? I said. Of course, my mom said. Did his food truck file a loss on taxes this year? My brother's jaw tightened. That's private. I'm about to give you $30,000. I think it's relevant. Technically, my dad said, shifting in his chair. There were some write-offs. Were there any profits? The silence told me everything. You have a stable job, my mom said, pivoting. You have your apartment. You're not struggling. Your brother is trying to build something. He just needs a runway. A runway. The exact word. I had heard it before, applied to every iteration of my brother's entrepreneurial phases. The reselling sneakers phase, the cryptocurrency phase, the dropshipping phase, the coffee subscription phase, and now this, the elevated taco phase. Each one had needed a runway. None of them had ever taken off. My brother was 34. He had never held a job longer than 2 years. He had borrowed money from my parents, from our aunt, from a friend of the family who I'm fairly certain he'd never paid back. Every few years, he repackaged himself with a new concept and a new ask, and every time my parents looked at him like he was on the verge of something extraordinary, and every time I was the one they looked at when the bill came due. I held my fork and breathed. To understand why this moment landed the way it did, I need to explain something about the last decade of my life. I was the quiet one. Not shy, not timid, just the one who kept her head down and did the work. When my parents were struggling financially the year I graduated high school, I didn't ask for the graduation party my friends got. I got a job at a coffee shop and put half of every paycheck in an envelope that I left on the kitchen counter without making a thing of it. When my brother failed his first semester of college and my mom was devastated, I was the one who sat up with her until midnight while she cried. When he got a DUI at 26 and needed someone to drive him to his court dates, I took the mornings off work without telling anyone what I was doing. I did all of that, not because I was asked, but because I understood, from a very early age, that being dependable was the only way to have any kind of footing in this family. The problem with being dependable is that people stop asking, they start assuming. I appreciate the thought, I said, which was not true at all. But I've already made decisions about my inheritance. My mom blinked. What do you mean? I mean, I've already allocated the money. To what? My dad asked. I had 2 options at this point. I could deflect. Say I'd put it in investments, keep it vague, run out the clock. That was the safe play. But I had been doing the safe play my entire life. I bought a condo, I said. In Austin. I put the inheritance toward the down payment. The table went very still. Austin, my mom said. Texas, I confirmed. You bought a condo in Texas, my dad said slowly, like he was testing the sentence to see if it was real. Without telling us. I don't need 31, I said. But we could have discussed it, my mom said. Her voice had shifted into the register she used when she was hurt and wanted me to know she was hurt. We're your family. You just made a decision like that without even mentioning it. To be fair, I said, no one mentioned to me that my inheritance was being earmarked for a food truck rebrand either. We seem to be even. My brother put his fork down. So you're telling me you spent the money? I invested it, I said. Yes. In yourself. He said it like it was an accusation. That is generally what an inheritance is for, I said. My father's face had gone a deep, unpleasant red. He had a particular look when he felt his authority being circumvented. Jaw forward, eyes flat. I had spent most of my childhood doing things to avoid that look. I'd been so careful about it for so long that seeing it now sitting still across the table from it felt almost surreal. So that's it, my dad said. Your brother is struggling and you just spent it. I used it to build stability for my own future. Which is what Nana intended. Nana intended for this family to take care of each other, my mom said. And she was crying now, or very close to it, the way she cried when she wanted the conversation to stop going in the direction it was going. She would be so disappointed in you right now. I had to be very careful here. The mention of my grandmother was designed to destabilize me. My grandmother and I had been close. Closer than she was with my brother, though no one in my family would have ever said that out loud. She had told me 6 months before she died that she hoped I would use the money for myself. She had said it exactly once quietly while we were sitting in her garden, and she had looked at me with this expression like she already knew what was going to happen and she was trying to arm me against it. I had not told my parents she said that. I was glad now that I hadn't. I know she would have supported my decision, I said calmly, because she supported me when she was alive. My brother pushed back from the table. This is unbelievable. Do you know how hard I've been working? Do you know what it's like to build something from nothing while everyone around you has a nice safe office job and a 401k? I know exactly what it's like to build something from nothing, I said. I didn't have help either. You had the same parents we all had. I had the same parents who right now are trying to give my inheritance to you. He opened his mouth, closed it. My dad stood up. Enough. You are going to figure out a way to support your brother. That is what families do. I don't care what you did with the money. There are options. A personal loan, a payment plan. You make a good salary. I have my own expenses, I said. You have one person to take care of. Yourself. Your brother has a business, a truck payment, a storage unit, employees. One employee, my brother muttered, and she's part-time. It doesn't matter how many employees, my dad said, waving his hand. The point is he has obligations. You can afford to help. I looked at my plate. The turkey had gone cold. The candles my mom lit for ambiance were burning down at the edges, leaving little waxy craters. I had made a second decision 3 weeks ago. Right around the same time, I signed the closing documents on my condo. I had accepted a job offer in Austin, contracts manager at a hospital network there, with a 15% salary increase, a full relocation package, and a start date of December 2nd. 5 days away. I had not mentioned this to my family because I had learned, over 31 years, that announcing plans in this house was the same as inviting intervention. But I thought about what I'd learned from watching other people navigate these conversations. The ones who stayed quiet, kept everything private, slipped away cleanly without the confrontation. Those people sometimes got out, but they spent years looking over their shoulder, waiting for the guilt to catch up with them, wondering if they'd done it wrong. I didn't want to spend years. So I sat up straighter, put my hands flat on the table, and said, I'm moving to Austin on Monday. My mother stopped mid-reach for her wine glass. I accepted a job there in October, I said. Senior role, better pay, full relocation. I've been planning this for 4 months. The condo closes Friday. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Monday, my mom finally repeated. My last day at my current job was last Friday. I'm already done here. My brother stared at me. You're leaving, I'm relocating, I said. Yes, and you didn't tell us. My dad's voice had gone quiet, which was somehow worse than when it was loud. You sat there and let us plan, let your mother prepare. With respect, I said, I did not let you plan anything involving my money. I was informed at dinner that a plan had been made for me. That is very different. My mom was crying properly now. So you're just abandoning us. Your brother is drowning and you're running away. I'm not running away from anything. I'm running towards something, I said. And I've been trying to do that my entire adult life, and every time I get close, there's a reason I need to stay. There's a crisis. There's a shortfall. There's a rough patch that needs my paycheck to smooth over. I looked at my brother. I love you, I do, but I cannot be your financial plan. I never asked you to be, he snapped. You didn't have to. Mom and Dad did it for you. His face changed. Something flickered in it, embarrassment maybe, or the recognition of something he hadn't wanted to look at directly. This is not over, my dad said. You are not walking out of this house and moving to Texas like this is nothing. I'm not doing it like it's nothing, I said. I've been doing it quietly for 4 months because this, I gestured at the table, the crying, the raised voices, is exactly what I wanted to avoid. I wanted to leave without it becoming a war. But you brought it to the dinner table, so here we are. I pushed my chair back, picked up my bag from the entryway, and stood at the door for a moment. The food was good, Mom, I said, because it was, and because she'd worked hard on it, and because I genuinely meant it. I'll text when I land. My dad said something as I walked out. My brother said something louder. I closed the door on both of them and got in my car and sat there for a minute, hands on the wheel, engine off, heart hammering. I had done it. I had actually said the words out loud to their faces and then stood up from the table. But as I backed out of the driveway, I knew it wasn't going to end there. My family had a way of treating closed doors as temporary. They would regroup. They would call. They would find a new angle. I had just turned onto the freeway when my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Then my brother texted, "You think you're so much better than us. You always have." Then my mom, "Please call me. Your dad is very upset. We need to finish this conversation." Then my dad, which surprised me because he almost never texted, "This isn't done." I got home, finished the last of my packing, and did not respond to any of them. Sunday morning, I was sealing boxes when my mom called again. I answered, because I thought maybe the anger had cooled enough for a real conversation. It hadn't. She spent 12 minutes telling me that I had humiliated my father, that my grandmother would be grieving, and that my brother had missed a payment on his truck loan because he'd been counting on my contribution. He was counting on money I never agreed to give, I said. We told him you'd help. You shouldn't have done that. You're his sister. I know. I love him. And I still cannot give him $30,000. She hung up before I could say anything else. I didn't hear anything from them Monday morning. I loaded the last boxes into my car, handed my landlord the keys, and drove to the airport alone. It was early, barely 6:00, the sky still dark and the highway mostly empty. I had a large coffee and a breakfast sandwich, and I sat at my gate and I felt not good. Exactly. Not the clean, bright relief I'd imagined. Something more complicated. A mix of grief and freedom that I didn't have a word for yet. My new apartment in Austin was a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building near a greenbelt. There were oak trees outside the window and a trail I could walk in the mornings and a grocery store close enough to get to on foot. I spent the first 3 days unpacking, and on the 4th day I started my new job. And I had so much to learn that I didn't have time to think about much else. But the calls kept coming. My brother called twice and left no voicemails, which meant he wanted me to call back out of guilt rather than information. My mom called with updates delivered in the tone of news reports. Your father's blood pressure has been high. The doctor says it's stress-related. He asked about you. I recognized the structure. I had seen it my whole life. The health update as a summoning device. Then, 2.5 weeks after I'd moved, I got an email from the HR department at my new job. The subject line read, Verification Request. Background matter. I opened it with my stomach already twisting. It was a message from HR informing me that they had received an inquiry from a third party claiming that I had misrepresented my financial history and was involved in a family estate dispute that was currently under legal review. They wanted to know if I had any context to provide. I sat in my new office, in my new city, looking at my new computer screen, and I felt the specific cold dread of a person who realizes that the war has followed them across state lines. My brother had contacted my employer. He had dressed it up in formal language, estate dispute, legal review, to make it sound like I was under investigation for something. I knew immediately, because I knew him, exactly how he'd framed it. I called HR within the hour. I explained everything: the inheritance, the family conflict, the fact that there was no legal dispute of any kind, that I had purchased my condo lawfully and cleanly, and that I had documentation for every part of it. My HR director was professional and calm. She told me the inquiry had come via email from a personal address, that it had no legal letterhead and no formal claim attached, and that she felt confident in my standing. But she logged the complaint and told me to let her know if anything escalated. I hung up and stared at the wall for a moment. Then I opened a new document on my computer and began making notes. Dates, messages, the content of voicemails I'd saved. I had been a contracts manager for 6 years. I knew exactly how important documentation was. I knew what it meant to have a paper trail. I sent my brother one text. What you did was harassment. I have documentation. Do not contact my employer again. He did not respond. My mom called 2 days later. She didn't mention the HR thing, which told me she either didn't know or was pretending not to. She asked if I was settling in. She asked if Austin was hot. She told me my dad had started going to bed earlier and that she was worried about him. She asked, very carefully, almost as an afterthought, whether I had thought any more about the loan. There's no loan, I said. There never was a loan. I'm not giving money to the business. Not even a smaller amount? Something to help him get through the… No, she was quiet. Mom, I said, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly. Okay, did you know about the HR email? A pause. He mentioned he was going to reach out to your company. I told him not to. I told him it was too far. Her voice was tight. I didn't know he'd actually done it. He did. I'm sorry, she said, and she sounded like she meant it. That was wrong. I'll talk to him. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in months. I held on to that. I'm not trying to punish anyone, I said. I'm not trying to make anyone suffer. I left because I needed to build something for myself, and I couldn't do that while I was the family safety net. That's the truth. I know, she said quietly. I know that's true. I worry about him. I know you do. But worrying about him can't mean dismantling my future. She cried a little. I didn't try to fix it. I found out what happened next through my cousin, who is the family's most reliable neutral party, someone who cares about all of us but has a functional sense of reality. My brother's food truck had officially closed. He'd been unable to make the storage lot payment. The truck itself had been repossessed after 3 consecutive missed payments. He was back living with my parents. My dad had retired 2 years ago on a fixed pension. My mom had a part-time bookkeeping job she'd been doing remotely for years. They were comfortable, not wealthy, and adding a 34-year-old with no income back into the household was straining things in ways they hadn't anticipated. They're managing, my cousin said carefully. But your dad keeps saying the whole thing could have been avoided if you'd just helped. Do they believe that? Your dad does. Your mom? I think she knows. She just can't say it. I sat with that for a while after I hung up. The part I hadn't expected, the part no one tells you about when you finally make the break, is that the relief and the grief arrive at the same time and stay that way. I was building something real. In Austin, I had a job I was good at, a neighborhood I was starting to love, a therapist I'd been seeing every other week, who was helping me understand why I had spent so many years making myself smaller to keep everyone else comfortable. I was genuinely happy in ways I hadn't been in a long time, and I also missed my family. The version of them that existed before every conversation became a transaction. The Thanksgiving smells, even if I'm honest. The acoustic playlist my mom always put on. My brother called once more in February. I answered because I was tired of avoiding it. I lost the truck, he said. I heard. I wanted to say. He stopped. Started again. I think I was pretty awful to you. About the money. About how I handled the job thing, you mean contacting my employer? Yeah. He sounded exhausted. Yeah, I don't even know what I was thinking. I was panicking and I'm sorry. It wasn't a complete apology. It didn't wrap anything up neatly. But it was the first time in my memory that my brother had called to give me something rather than take something, and I didn't want to waste it. Thank you for saying that, I said. I mean it. We talked for 20 minutes. It was awkward and imperfect, and occasionally he said something that made me go quiet because old patterns don't dissolve in one conversation. But at the end of it, something had shifted, even if only by a degree. My parents and I are still figuring out what we are to each other now. My mom and I text. My dad and I don't talk much yet. I think he's still processing the fact that the version of me he built his expectations around. The one who stayed. The one who absorbed. The one who absorbed without complaint. That version is gone. I'm not angry about who I was. She did what she had to do. But I'm not going back. Last Sunday, I woke up without an alarm. Made coffee in my own kitchen. The good kind, the kind I buy now because I can afford the extra $4 and there's no one to call it frivolous. I sat at my window and watched the light come up over the trees. My phone was on the counter, silent. No summons, no crisis, no math that someone else had done with my money. I had a whole day ahead of me that belonged entirely to me, and I sat there for a long time just letting that be true. My grandmother used to say that the best inheritance she could give any of us was an example of someone who knew her own worth. I didn't understand what she meant when she said it. I understand it now.